Thank you. I am Beth Alexandri with the Federal Highway Administration, and I'm thrilled to have been offered the opportunity to sort of be the quick and dirty MC for this particular event. What we have here today is representatives, senior leadership representatives from the 3 U.S. Department of Transportation entities that have really worked hard to make sure that Road to Zero keeps moving forward in conjunction with the National Safety Council. So I am thrilled to start off introducing Butch Wadelick. Butch is, I have to be really nice to him because he's my boss. Butch is the acting deputy administrator of the Federal Highway Administration. I have some very serious words to say about him, none of which I'm going to say. I can tell you that as long as I have known Butch, and he has held many, many roles in the Federal Highway Administration. He's had significant field experience. He's been a division administrator. He's been the Associate Administrator for Infrastructure, and every single position Butch has been in, he has focused on safety. When he was the AA for Infrastructure, I was in a meeting with Butch, and he made the most passionate description of strategic highway safety plans and how they have changed the way that the states do their business, even more so than I've made. And those of you who know me know I can do that pretty passionately. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Butch Wadelick.
Appreciate it, Beth. Thank you very much. I guess it was last fall we got together with the National Safety Council to launch the Road to Zero initiative, and I guess that was, 6-7 months ago. And I think you'll agree, and I have to say a lot's changed in that 6-7 months. And although we have a new administration now with new goals, new agenda, one thing that I can guarantee you that has not changed, and I need to say this, and it was one of the things that the Secretary brought up the first day she came into the building, and that's safety is the highest priority of the U.S. DOT. Highway safety is not a partisan idea. Regardless of political affiliation, all Americans travel on the same roads, and these same roads are a common touchstone for all of us. Roads literally unite our states of America. So our mission of ensuring that the public can get to and from their homes safely is one that we all share. We're working to advance safety through innovative next-generation technologies like vehicle-to-vehicle communications and intelligent transportation systems. But we're looking for ways to improve time-tested tools like guardrails, signs, and other roadside hardware. Now, this is the 50th anniversary of the U.S. Department of Transportation. And it's important to note that the work started decades ago has actually changed. It's actually evolved. As the needs of the traveling public change, so will our efforts. We've made headway, and roadway fatality rates are at record lows. And that's been that way for the last decade. In 2015, there was just over 1 roadway death for every 100 million vehicle miles traveled. To put that in perspective, in 1967, when the Federal Highway Administration was created, the nation's roadway fatality rate was 5 times higher than it is today. So we are saving lives. We're simply just not saving enough lives. We can't comfort ourselves with fatality rates and falling percentages, and in pure terms, the number of annual roadway deaths continue to be unacceptably high. All of us at the Federal Highway Administration support the Road to Zero Coalition, the goal of ensuring zero fatalities on our roads within the next 30 years. With breakthroughs like automated vehicle technology showing incredible promise, the United States has not only a chance but an obligation to make thousands of roadway fatalities each year a thing of the past. Connected vehicles and new crash avoidance technology could also potentially produce over 80% of the crashes involving unimpaired drivers, and that translates into a lot of saved lives. Technology and safety can go hand in hand, and they can also work at cross purposes. If we let ourselves become distracted while we're driving by texting instead of keeping our eyes on the road. And the Road to Zero Coalition took a major step forward last fall, and I have every hope that this effort will continue to make gains in the years ahead. On behalf of the Federal Highway Administration, I want to thank you for the work you're doing and will continue to do, and I look forward to working with you and making highways, sidewalks, and bike paths the safest in the world. I'd also like to follow a little bit with what Beth had said, a little bit of my experience is out in the field. And, I first came about zero in a state called, Utah. And they just called it zero fatalities. And one thing that I learned, that's the only goal that's out there, because what's acceptable to you and your family, and it's zero. There's no other number that's acceptable. And whether it's zero fatalities, vision zero, towards zero deaths, or the road to zero, the coalition of working together makes a big difference. Just to throw out an example, the state of California, and this is where I really learned with the strategic highway safety plans, working together just how much you can achieve using data and information, and all sources, all of the people that are interested in highway safety, you can really make a difference. And I saw numbers drop there incredibly. 30%. It was well over 4,000 when I got there, and we got below 3,000 before I left. So working together, we can accomplish a lot. And one thing I can guarantee you with the Federal Highway Administration and me, you've got an advocate for safety as long as I'm there. Thank you.
Told you. I am also privileged to introduce Daphne Johnson. Deputy Administrator Daphne Johnson joins us today from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Commercial vehicles are clearly a very important constituency group here in terms of reaching zero, and I'm looking forward to continuing both the Road to Zero work and our ongoing FHWA relationship with the Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Welcome back to the Road to Zero.
Good morning, everyone. FMCSA is proud to stand with our colleagues from the Federal Highway Administration and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in supporting the National Safety Council's Road to Zero Coalition. It was last October when I had a chance to speak at the kickoff, and it's my privilege to be back here again. As everyone in this room knows, safety is our #1 priority. It's in our name, it's in our DNA as FMCSA. And we fully support the goals of the coalition because they're our goals. And they perfectly align with what we do within the FMCSA mission, which is to prevent crashes involving large trucks and buses. And we continue to push forward on initiatives focused on safety. And it's gratifying to see that we've got over 300 organizations that are working collectively towards zero fatalities. And as Butch said, that really is the only goal. There's no acceptable solution. I've had people say, well, that's a very big goal. That's a very bold goal, given that 4,337 people lost their lives in 2015 due to crashes involving large trucks and buses. There is no acceptable solution other than zero, and we continue to support this initiative. And FMCSA is the organization within the Department of Transportation that's responsible for overseeing commercial vehicles, large trucks and buses, as they travel on our nation's highways. And some of the statistics that are particularly troubling involve crashes and fatalities for large trucks and buses. Large trucks and buses represent about 5% of the registered vehicles. They account for 10% of total vehicle miles changed, yet are involved in 12% of fatal crashes. And that's a number that we all have to engage in and push towards zero. Over the last couple of years, as vehicle miles have increased, the economy has improved, we've seen an uptick in fatalities. And we have to recognize that we have to do more. What we did over the last 20 years to bring those numbers down, we have to continue to push forward, whether it be through education, talking about distraction, talking about the issues that impact safety, as well as focusing on automated driving systems that we believe will help drive those numbers even further down. At FMCSA, we deploy over 300 safety investigators and 150 border inspectors across the country to help reverse this trend. Their job is to make sure that the commercial vehicles operating on the roads are fit, the drivers are fit, and the companies are willing and able to operate safely on our nation's highways. And through our grants program, we also leverage the efforts of over 13,000 state and local law enforcement officers that are certified to enforce commercial motor vehicle safety requirements and laws. And despite the recent trends, we believe the future is very bright. Secretary Elaine L. Chao has really put safety at the top of her priority list, as well as technology. And we believe there are some benefits to be gained through autonomous vehicles, through automated driving systems, and the work that's being done. The commercial fleet is taking its lead from the light vehicles and moving forward with automation, as well as making sure that as we move forward with automation, we focus on the fact that we don't want to distract the driver from his or her number one responsibility, which is operating safely and maintaining awareness at all times on what's going on the roads. And FMCSA continues to work with the industry, with technology providers, with companies, and with driver organizations to make sure that we collectively are putting safety at the front. We believe our role is really not to impede automation, technology, or innovation. We want to run alongside and make sure that we're the voice of safety in the room as we continue to progress. The stakes are high, they're always high, and highway safety continues to grow in significance as the demand for freight continues to grow. And we believe that we're fortunate that this coalition exists and that the partnerships are strong. And we appreciate the opportunity to support the Road to Zero and the National Safety Council. Thank you.
I feel obligated to introduce our next speaker as, I don't know, Jeff Thomas, since I said Jackson for Ms. Jefferson. I'm so sorry. Okay. What's wrong with me this morning? Associate Administrator Thomas. No, I jest. Jeff Michael is a vital part of our programs. I don't think I really need to introduce him to this crew, but he is an Associate Administrator at NHTSA and has been part of the Road to Zero since we started. Jeff?
You can call me anything you like.
I will. For dinner.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said about me. Thank you. So I'm not a key official at NHTSA, but I know the key officials, and I know that a schedule change prevented our acting deputy administrator, Jack Danielson, from being here. So he asked me to share a few words from him. I can't do that, but I'll share some words from me. And I would just like to remark on how far we've come here with this group. It was just 8 months ago, just in early October, that we met for the first time across the river. A group of us had been concerned about the increasing fatality numbers, and also at the same time, I think, very optimistic about the potential of future technology. And we had this idea that if we got the right people together, that we could make a strong case for change. And so we were, I think, thrilled when 150 organizations showed up last October who were of the same mind. And we launched I think a powerful program with sort of two main objectives. One was to respond to the immediate uptick in fatalities with a combination of proven programs and innovative strategies. And the second was to begin developing a vision, a 30-year vision, for how we might be able to put together those kinds of proven countermeasures with an accelerated deployment of future technologies and reach zero within 30 years. So that was 8 months ago. In 8 months, we administered our first round of grants, and I'm very pleased with the proposals that we received. I wish we could have funded more of them, but the Safety Council funded I think a really nice set of innovative strategies to address the immediate problem. In addition, we've had, I think, 8 or 9 full days of meetings with groups of you to start developing that vision for a future zero traffic scenario. And now, here we are 8 months later, and we're up now to almost double the number of organizations. And I think we're well on our way to a very successful first year. So I'd like to thank all of you first for your continued involvement at every level. Thank my colleagues at the DOT, and thank Debbie Hirschman and the National Safety Council for their leadership. Thank you.
So we know you guys are very busy, and we want to give you the opportunity to pull the escape hatch if you need to. And we thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your team and your expertise and your resources. So we always want to start our meetings with a safety briefing and a safety message. We are very appreciative that Kaiser Permanente has hosted us here at their Total Health Center. And I'd like to introduce Keith Montgomery, who's the executive director here. And for full disclosure, I live in Chicago now. They don't have a Kaiser there. But when I lived in DC as a federal employee, I was a Kaiser member for over 20 years. So Keith, thank you for being here.
So welcome to the Center for Total Health. I hope you have some time today to explore our exhibits. This is a perfect type of meeting that we like to host here on everything related to health. And you'll see just on the video wall next to you, lots of different topics related to public health, environmental health, mental health, all kinds of topics. So thank you for choosing this place for your meeting today. We're happy to host. And of course, in line with your safety message, we want to make sure you're all aware should we need to evacuate, and we have no plans to do so today. There are two routes. There's the main door that you came in, and then back through this convergence room, there is another route out through our kitchen. What we ask you all to do, should we have to evacuate, is go directly across the street to the apartment building where you'll be in the shade. We want everyone to gather there because we have a list of attendees so we can make sure that we got everyone safely out. And please do not go under the H Street Bridge because a number of groups do try to go under there because if it's raining or something they want cover. But unfortunately, we have to make sure we've accounted for everyone that's in attendance. So we need to do our count first before people can kind of spread out and seek other shelter. So that's our safety message for today, but you would hear alarms and everything go off that would tell you it's time to evacuate. Some other housekeeping notes. We have installed in our displays a public service announcement poster on behalf of this initiative. So if you have an opportunity to go around back and look at the bus shelter, we've designed a special exhibit with the group here to commemorate the event. Also, if you're looking to get on Wi-Fi, all you have to do is open up a browser. You should see one of our pages pop up, and you just have to accept our terms. So if you need to go on Wi-Fi today, that's available for free to all of our guests. And if you haven't explored yet how to get to the restrooms, either way, around what we call the boxcar here, the main exhibits, there are restrooms on the other side of the boxcars. So please enjoy your day. You'll see staff around. We're around to answer your questions and help you have a successful event.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting us, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here in a place that's focused on total health. We're going to do our best to keep people out of emergency rooms and in long-term care with your providers. So, Keith, thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we've got a great day planned. We've got a lot of great speakers, and then we've got some group work that we're going to do, and we'll talk to you about that in a minute. But first, I want to ask you to just think of something. And I want to ask you to go back in your time machine and think about something in your life that's changed. What did you do as a kid that you wouldn't even think about letting your kids do today? So just take a moment, think about that. Beth is saying everything. So you probably have something in your head now And I'm sure that you've thought of a number of different things, some of them that you would share and some that you wouldn't. But I want you to think about what changed. And I bet you can't put your finger on a single moment or a specific action that actually resulted in that change. It occurred slowly over time, and it's like a sandcastle on a beach that gets washed away. This is how culture shifts. And when we talk about the landscape that we live in, it's changed a lot. When we were kids, we rode in the back of pickup trucks, we stepped on pop tops, and no one that I knew even owned a bicycle helmet. But today, if you have kids like I do, I've got 3 boys, you have a garage full of bicycle helmets. We may not notice how it happens, but there comes a tipping point where change becomes inevitable. Whether at work, at home, or on the road, safety culture has shifted in very noticeable ways in positive directions over the decades. And it came about because there were people who understood the importance of safety. And these individuals, these safety sponsors, were willing to bring other people along with them. Everyone here in this room today is a safety sponsor. Safety sponsors are people who get it. Do we have a clicker? Be good pre-flight planning to actually have my equipment before I get up. Thank you, Jeff. So everyone here who's with us today is a safety sponsor. Technology expert in the front row told me to turn it on. Okay, here we go. Thank you. So our Road to Zero members who are involved today and the people who have helped us over the years get to where we are and make those changes that some of our speakers shared, these folks were the safety sponsors. They were the people who got it and the people who have joined our coalition. They're helping us redefine what we take for granted. And so I want to actually take you back and share an example with you of a time at the turn of the century where things looked very different. We're going to talk about the herald of progress, of technological progress that physically remade the landscape. And I'm not talking about the cell phone. I'm talking about the trains and our rail system. Did you know at the turn of the century, 48% of work-related deaths occurred on the railroads? Almost half of all workplace fatalities occurred on the rails. As we built and linked our nation with steel, sweat, and steam, thousands of people perished due to the harsh working conditions. Up on the screen, you can actually see a National Safety Council poster from 1920, and it shows how workers used to couple and uncouple trains manually. So it's no surprise that thousands of workers were maimed every year performing this very risky task. Working on the railroad truly was a deadly dangerous job. But that was the accepted reality at the time. Then there were several innovations by safety sponsors that created a tipping point for railroad safety. In 1887, George Westinghouse modified his passenger train air brake so that it would work on long freight trains. And Eli Janney developed an automatic car coupler like the one that you see here. Safety sponsors in Congress actually mandated the use of such equipment in 1893 with some of the first legislation intended to improve worker safety. Within 10 years, coupler-related deaths dropped by 80%. Within 100 years, railroad employee on-duty fatalities continued to drop precipitously. This effort was led by safety sponsors. The shift in railroad safety represents a triumph of tech innovation and safety culture, changing one policy, one company, and one person at a time. While railroad tracks and freight trains still look very much the same today as they did 100 years ago, the reality is this industry is a much less dangerous place to work, and their definition of normal has shifted. Look at how long they've sustained that very low number. So I shared with you that 48% of workplace fatalities occurred on the rails at the turn of the century. Guess where almost 40% of workplace fatalities occur today? Come on, you guys. On the road. Okay, great. So that's why we're here. Why aren't we outraged or upset by the fact that 40%, almost 40% of workplace fatalities are occurring on the road? When I told you almost that 48% occurred on the railroads, that probably made you feel really frustrated. Like, are you kidding? That's crazy. Why don't we have that same reaction about the deaths on the roads? Why do we accept them? They happen one person at a time, like those deaths on the railroad, but somehow we act complacent about those deaths today. If we were able to shift that definition of what the new normal was for railroad safety, for airline safety, we can do the same for highway safety. I want to talk to you about another example of how culture has shifted. How many of you remember riding, and Erica, you're too young, you probably don't. How many of you remember riding in cars without wearing your seatbelts? Show of hands. Okay, so at least half of you all. This is my baby sister, Michelle. She's standing in front of our old Ford LTD wood-paneled station wagon, our favorite family car. And when I was growing up, there were no child safety seats. When we visited our relatives in West Virginia, in that station wagon, we weren't restrained. And in fact, we usually tried to figure out who could get in the way back and sleep in the back under the blankets and the sleeping bags. I remember, though, in particular, one trip when we were heading back to visit our relatives. And my dad, who was a fighter pilot, hit a dog on the road. My sister Val and I were really upset as we saw the dog limp away, and we asked my dad why he didn't stop and avoid hitting the dog. Today, I understand just how fast his test pilot decision-making skills were. After he found the dog's owner, he explained to my sisters and I that he made a choice between the dog and my sister Michelle. Michelle was perched on the armrest in the front seat, sitting in between my mom and dad because she liked to look out the window while we were driving. When my kids left the hospital, and I mentioned that I was a Kaiser Permanente member, they all had to be restrained. I remember having to bring the child safety seat into the discharge area to put my children in the child safety seat. They wouldn't let me leave the hospital without it. My 3 boys have been safely restrained during every car ride since the day they left the hospital. This is Jackson. He's my youngest, and he is 11 years old now. Today, kids are not aware of a life unrestrained. They will never raise their hand when someone asks them, do you remember a time when you didn't use a seatbelt? And parents today don't have to choose between emergency braking and their child's safety. We often don't acknowledge or recognize these changes, but through education, legislation, and enforcement, we have changed behaviors in a single generation. We have shifted from only 10% of people wearing seatbelts to 10% not wearing them. It may have once been perfectly normal not to be restrained in a vehicle, But today, for most of us, when we get in a car and we don't have our seatbelts on or there isn't a seatbelt available, it just feels wrong. So Jeff shared with you that we have made great progress. This slide is actually needs updating because we have hit 290 discrete organizations in the Road to Zero Coalition. And so we're super excited about our partners on this moonshot, and we've talked about getting to zero as being a moonshot. And it may seem at times that this is almost impossible, and that our inherent problems are insurmountable. But just like those rail worker fatalities that people probably thought, it's the cost of doing business, we can't change it, we know better. We know that there is amazing technology on the horizon that can save lives, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that technology, its potential, but also we want to make sure we understand what some of the unintended consequences or risks of technology will be. But we're going to hear from our friends at the University of Central Florida and Toyota's North American Research Institute in just a couple of minutes. These are some of today's safety sponsors when we start talking about innovations and opportunities. But in this room, we have, and in this group, we have advocates, we have passionate advocates, we have super smart people who are working on design and engineering challenges. And we know that these safety sponsors are going to be the one that tip the scales and help us move towards zero. Automation will be a game changer for many of us. It may make driving safer. And maybe one day we're going to see a steering wheel as inappropriate in a car as when we see a child riding unrestrained today. So when it comes to our challenges, we definitely have a lot of sponsors who are working alongside with us. But I think when it comes to the challenge that we have, it's about society and that cultural shift. We have, unfortunately, a lot of cultural Novocaine that has not worn off when it comes to complacency about highway fatalities. We need to have more outrage. We need to have more action. We need to have commitment on these issues. But together, that's why we're here, is to create that tipping point in how we work, how we live, and how we drive. So when we talk about making an impact for future generations, hopefully our great-grandchildren in 100 years will look at some of these slides and say they couldn't even imagine the hazards that we faced in 2017. Michelangelo said, "The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it." So we have set our standards high. Thank you all for being along on this journey with us. And thank you all so much for being here today. You all are welcome to stay sitting up front if you want, but we're going to introduce our speakers. So if you'd like to take a more comfortable viewing position. Oh, Domingo. Great. Okay. We actually have a member of our steering group and also a representative of the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, Domingo Horaz, who's here to introduce our speakers. Domingo, thank you.
Scare you there. Good morning, everyone. Our next, I like that, some enthusiasm. This is good. Our next speaker is Dr. Peter A. Hancock. He's Provost Distinguished Research Professor in the Department of Psychology and the Institute for Simulation and Training, as well as at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management Systems at the University of Central Florida. He directs the MIT Research Laboratories and Associate Director of the Center for Applied Human Factors in Aviation. Prior to his current position, he founded and was the director of the Human Factors Research Laboratory at the University of Minnesota, where he held appointments as professor in the departments of computer science and electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, psychology, as well as Cognitive Science Center and the Center on Aging Research. He continues to hold an appointment as a clinical adjunct professor in the Department of Psychology at Minnesota. He is also affiliated scientist of the Humans and Automation Laboratory at MIT, a research associate of the University of Michigan Transport Research Institute, and a senior research associate at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition in Pensacola, Florida. He will be speaking to us today on how can safe systems compensate for human behavior limitations.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very honored to be here and massively intimidated because I suddenly realize what power is in the audience today. So you'll have to apologize before we start, but I'm going to have some fun. I hope you do too. I changed my title. I'm talking about AUTOPIA. I'll explain what that is, and I'll talk about whether it's a delusion or whether it's a real delta. So let's have a look at the world. I'm going to explain what I'm going to talk about so that you know where we are. I'm going to talk about the conflict we are now in. I'm going to talk about how well humans actually drive anyway. I'm going to talk about the issues from automation to autonomy, and then we have a little glimpse at our future. But I know when I'm watching people, I really want to know, when's this guy going to finish? So watch the little car in the bottom there. It will make its progress as we go along. And so you'll be able to know just exactly how uncomfortable you need to be. I apologize to the cameraman. I like to move around. Well, the conflict we're in, look, we're moving forward already. It's got to be great. I'm going to apologize to President Lincoln, but 67 years ago, our forefathers brought forth upon this continent a new creation, conceived in Detroit, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created mobile. Now we are engaged in a great war to test whether that vehicle or any vehicle so conceived can long endure. And so today we are here highly resolved that these drivers shall not have traveled in vain, that these cars under the control shall not have a new birth of freedom, and that control of the vehicle by the driver for the people shall not perish from this earth. Good words, good words. Not in this way. Are we engaged in this battle? We certainly are. It's a very strange battle we're engaged in, but please understand there are other technologies that have engaged in the same battle, and we can take great advantage of what they've learned in the interim. And I'll explain a little bit about those advantages that we don't have to reinvent. And one of my examples, of course, is going to be aviation. But the question we have to ask ourselves now, which is the tumult we are in, is whether vehicles are actually computers on wheels. Is that what they are? Or are they actually, and there's a nice Tesla, I don't mind giving, I'm not affiliated with any government whatsoever, so I can bring up any things. I have no conflict of interest, I don't have a Tesla. But there's Mr. Tesla in the corner. But are they actually driven by supercomputers? And there's a little Volvo. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the absolute shape of the vehicle, that is its structural sort of appearance, is asymptote to a fairly common, in this case, survival-based notion of what happens in a technological environment, which is that the technology asymptotes, in this case, according to certain parts of the constraints of that operational procedure. But they're very, very different vehicles at this present time. So we're engaged in a battle. The battle is between the traditional, those people who have built vehicles and are now taking advantage of computational support, versus those people who've built computers and realize that most vehicles are now 40, 50, 60% computer and the rest is metal or whatever. So I talked about AUTOPIA, and we better talk about UTOPIA, because this is where I think you're aiming, and you better understand the origins and the basis of what that sort of vision is. You are not the first people to have that vision, not even proximally, not even within this century. So let's talk about the guy who did. This is the guy. What is then AUTOPIA? AUTOPIA is an intrinsic promise of an automated utopia. And here's the guy who talked about utopia first. I hope some of you can recognize this. This is Sir Thomas More. Everybody uses the word utopian. Nobody reads the book, of course. It's a shame. If you read the book, you learn you never want to live in utopia. Even though you eat off gold plates, you don't get to be a gardener. Read the book. It's actually fun, okay? About 1500, a few years ago. And here's what we have now as a prospect. And this is the sort of thing that, that More was offering before he got his head chopped off. Not particularly about transportation, but it's the idea of a collision-free transportation system. Is that vision a realistic vision? Yes, it could potentially be, and I'm going to discuss that here now. Is it possible? Yeah, I think it's possible. Are driverless cars the way to achieve it? Well, that might even be a little bit more of a polemic argument that I want to make this morning. So is it driverless vehicles? Let's look at the essence of the problem. I think the essence of the problem is looking at the everyday world. You can look straight out of that window. It's probably a lot better looking at me, okay? Or you can look at the screen, but there's the everyday world. This is from a guy called Klaus Tingvall, someone I've met only a couple of times, but he's one of the people who's a champion of Vision Zero for the Swedes. And I just want to acknowledge that this is his illustration, not mine. But here's the outside world as we see it. And what we see here is an everyday scene, people walking along, driving along in a second. And we can see that the hazard that we are placed in here is what William Haddon, a great advocate for safety in the past and a very insightful individual, what Bill Haddon called the tigers. He called them, you're faced with tigers. And here's the picture that I just showed you. You see that there. And it looks like there's no tigers, but there are tigers around there. So what Tingvall has done here very cleverly, because this is how you get your message across, is he's actually now shown what the kinetic tiger actually looks like. And all of a sudden we see this child here, and what we realize is that we would never let that child wander within 2 or 3 feet of a cliff of that size. But what Tingvall is telling you is that, in this case, the kinetic tiger, that is the transfer of energy that's liable to engage with that child, if any vehicle hits it, is the equivalent of falling, in this case, off of a couple of 100 feet worth of cliff. And so all of a sudden what we have now is a description of the environment, which is where we become insensitive. I love the cultural Novocaine. I'm going to steal that one, believe me. That one will be presented in Dublin within a week, okay? The cultural Novocaine of not realizing what the tiger is going to do. And this, of course, Haddon was talking not just about kinetic, although that's the primary one that we face in our everyday life. He was talking about thermal, which we're going to face later today in Washington. Boy, you guys need to come down to Florida, where it's really nice and cool at this time of year. I never realized that. But this is not the only conception. So what I want to do today is explore for you a little bit about some of the historical origin. And this is one of the better articles ever written on driving. It's a 1938 article by Gibson and Crooks. And what they're doing here is they're explaining exactly what those fields of safe travel actually look like. And what we're doing when we're talking about automation and autonomy is we are providing an electronic surrogate, an external cellular technical surround, if you will, that enables us, in this case, to keep occupying that field of safe travel and to keep the tigers away. And what you see here, Haddon, I'm sure, was aware of this particular article, but here are the other vehicles, which in this case are the sort of proximal tigers. Now, I need to talk about that just a little bit more. So here's Gibson and Crooks, 1938, Journal of American Psychology, I think. American Journal of Psychology, pardon me. And here's the description that I've just generated for you. And this is a very reasonable representation in this case for driving. But there subsists under that, going further back, a wonderful experimental and theoretical psychologist called Kurt Lewin. I've always called him Lewin, the Germans call him Levine. But Levine did that generally. What he's done here, he's created, in this case, a state-based representation of the psychological and, in this case, the technical environment. 1936 note here. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to look at those transitions and where those transitions involve excessive energy. So this is the problem. Let's state the problem. The problem is things go bang against things that in actual fact are quite vulnerable. Okay? And you can scale those things up. This is not too vulnerable. It bounces back. I'm very vulnerable. Don't kick me later. Okay? So the transfer is contingent. I always do these things to try and make sure people are still awake. You can borrow these if you like. I've heard the definition of a professor is someone who has the very bad manners of speaking in someone else's sleep. So occasionally I try to wake people up. The students always look startled when I do this. All right, so how well do humans drive now? One of the, oh look, we're moving along, not too far away, here we go. So why is driving so interesting? I think there are a variety, in this case, a variety of major stimuli that still persist today that we have to take notice of. It's a social amenity. And what I mean by social amenity is not just purely the pragmatics of A to B. I mean it's a social structure. I got in an Uber today with the wonderful Susan, and it was a social interaction as well as, in this case, an origin to destination. Please don't let's forget that this is a social environment. I'll talk about greater freedom later on. It's perhaps the most daily practice of all adult skills. You might want to claim that now tapping on a typewriter or an interface or a keyboard is possibly practiced a little bit more. I'll sort of accept that if I have to. You push me to the wall. But it's a very, very well practiced skill. It's the most litigated form of all human activity. I'd argue that as well. So certainly we do a lot of forensic analysis after the fact about this, and I do those things as well as probably as some as you do. And it's the last great bastion of apparent analog control. So we have seen our wonderful world change over, as was talked about by Dr. Hersman earlier, from one place to another, and we have changed very much from an analog age, which, yes, I do remember, yes, I was there, to a digital age, and this is one of the few occasions now where you continue to assert analog control. I've said apparent because, of course, all of you realize that virtually all modern vehicles don't actually have analog control. They do A to D and then D back to A again. And I think one of the most important things that we have to recognize is that this is the place where most people are going to meet their robots. Okay? In 10 or 15 years, it's going to be robot world, and this is where you first meet your robot, your sophisticated robot, not your Roomba, not the thing spreading stuff across. Yeah, I know you've seen all the YouTubes, okay? Not that one that spreads across the floor and gets under your feet. That's not where you meet your robot. Here's where you meet your robot. This is a robot. And make no mistake, of course, modern cars are robots, and they're built by robots. You need to think about that one just in a little bit more detail than the sort of slide throws at you. These are machines built by machines. And I will ask you difficult questions today, not merely about, in this case, prevention of the transfer of energy, but what it actually means to be in a new environment built by robots. So, distraction, no problem here then. Primum non nocere. If you don't know what that means, I think Debbie is going to take your membership away. First, do no harm. But if we're going to do no harm, what is the harm that we presently have? And to do that, we have to examine exactly how good this system works right now. How well do people actually drive? How good are they at avoiding accidents? Oh, this is a terrible problem. I'll tell you how terrible this is. This is so terrible that you can make enormous amounts of money in this in Las Vegas. You can even have national lotteries, and I choose the Powerball as well, because people are awful, awful. Human beings are just pathetic at scaling non-events. They have no idea. What is the measure of non-events happening right now? Our good friend and colleague from FHWA talks about per 100 million miles driven. Well, I'm not a mile long. I'm about 5.5 feet long. And it takes me, if I'm 60 miles an hour, a minute. But a minute's too long for me. I mean, I don't deal in minutes anymore. I deal in seconds. What is the unit of analysis of a non-accident? Ask yourself that. And before you do anything else, ask yourself how well people are actually doing right now. Because if it's primum non nocere, if it's first do no harm, what sort of harm have we got right now? You can do some calculations. I'll show you how to do them. I don't know how reasonable they are. But in fact, as you look out that window, I can tell you pretty much statistically, and I hope it's not proven false, we will not see accidents out there today. They are rare events, and human beings are awful at rare events. How many non-accidents happen per day then? So difficult. How many non-accidents have happened as we've sat here? You tell me exactly, and then I'll be able to tell you what the improvement will be. So the psychological value of non-events. If you go to Las Vegas, what you find is a light for every loser, okay? That's the problem. You don't see every non-event. And that's why they can fool you into putting those extra dollars onto the table, and it's extremely profitable because it's that margin that you don't understand and don't code non-events. You don't in your memory, and you really don't in your passing consciousness. I can tell you that. Already my talk is probably a non-event in your head anyway, so that's all right. Don't worry, we've got it on tape or something or other. It's going somewhere in some part of the ether. So naturally, it is almost inevitable that human beings focus on the damage. And okay, let's do that. I mean, it's a pragmatic, it's a world we live in, but I still ask you to talk about the non-events. And look how well we're actually doing. I mean, if we look at that death rate and compare it with Debbie's death rate of the other vehicle, they both look a bit like Zipf's Law to me, but we've done pretty well. But again, as was referred to earlier, and I'll just go by it, there's a little uptick in the fatalities, and it should give us a little bit of pause, and especially if we can begin to epidemiologically tease out what are some of the major factors that might be involved. So let's have a look what it really looks like, okay? Too often we lose this. Just want to look at it. This is Joe Sixpack. Here he is. He's asleep. He's awake. He's moving in the car. I thank the people who gave me that particular one from one of the naturalistic driving studies. But we always have to remember this is a human event. You can't put up too many graphs. You can't let Descartes, in this case, prejudice the way in which you view it. These are very, very human events, and sometimes you live very close to them and too close to them. So, how could I do non-events? What might I do? Well, we've got some nice physical notions. Robert Boyle, our friend Robert Boyle, talked about some perfect gas banging around, in this case, at a certain temperature. Temperature is the number of collisions. You can talk about volume. In this case, the volume is the roadway. You can talk about the proportionality. And believe it or not, there's a wonderful thing called Boyle's Law. We could have a look at that. There's another one by James Clerk Maxwell. Could I start, in this case, from what a guy called Nikolai Reshevsky called the sort of basic fundamental geometry? Yes, I could. I could begin by that. I could begin to give you some estimates, and maybe I should. Maybe it's up to me to do that. I've tried a little earlier on the distracted driving to talk about how that might be done. But in essence, collisions are human problems. And let's say human beings are far from perfect. I know that because my wife is willing to tell me almost every day that I'm far from perfect. Turn the sound up if you would. So human beings make mistakes, and we sometimes, somehow, have got to protect them from those mistakes. We've got to make sure that mistake doesn't get close enough to the tiger for the tiger to bite. Okay, so we can look at a variety of things. I want to just transfer to some of the work I've done on distraction a little bit, what I call thieves of attention. And thieves of attention are a very interesting notion about what it is that we do while we're driving. So let me talk a little bit about driving. Here's one of the great problems about driving. When we do research on driving, we do something called optimization. That is, if I start a driving study with somebody, I say, please drive as safely and as accurately as possible. That's called optimization. That's not what people do. When you get in a car, you do something called satisficing. That is, you do well enough to do well enough. And believe it or not, that latter is an extremely important dimension. In fact, it was a central part of a guy called Herbert Simon, who won a Nobel Prize for economics. In reality, Simon was actually a psychologist. And he taught to us in a book, wonderful little book called Sciences of the Artificial, 1969, about the importance of understanding the difference between those two. So we can have a look at them in the vehicle while you're driving, and you could say things like, well, what's happening related to the vehicle, which is a distraction, but it's internal to the vehicle, or it's unrelated to the vehicle and it's external. So there are a variety of things. There are things inside the vehicle, passengers. Human beings are always fascinated by other human beings. It's their number one source of distraction, and it's inside the vehicle, and I can look at that. But there's other things like a navigation system, for example. There's external things that are very much related to driving, and there are also others pretty soon, like digital billboards. And what we find is we can now begin to plot out all the studies that have been done. This is the studies that have been done on all people in these particular situations, whether teenage, young, middle, or older drivers. And what I can do for you is I can plot out all of the technologies. I can plot out each of the there. And what you see is external, in this case distractive, really not been very well served by the current literature. But what I'm doing is exploring the idea of what it is that takes attention away. Because during the transition between those two great battles, between the vehicle as a vehicle and the vehicle as a computer, this is the intermediary step. And we're going to talk about that because it's autonomy, automation to autonomy. Look, we're more than halfway there. Thank goodness, you say. All right, so there are totally automated systems right now. This is the Pilbara mine. It works in Australia, and it works with no human beings. In fact, human beings are not allowed to be there. And if they have to go down for maintenance, they have to turn the whole thing off for people to go in. It's carrying on without human beings, and presumably without a little bit of entropy and without maintenance problems. It would still be going on after the last human being checked off of planet Earth. Here it is. You can see these guys. This is one of the people working for BHP whose mine it is. It should introduce a lot more hours onto the machine. These are all the essentially economic questions or advantages that people push forward for them. And these guys are talking about now we only need somebody remotely to do this. This is the sort of system that we don't see. It's in the middle of the nullarbor. It's far away from human beings and human eyes, but there it is working away, totally automated. I thought I'd put this one up a little bit more. Here's an example, a little bit more polemic, sort of interesting. Have a look as you're going on. This is an automated milking parlour. This is in the north of Scotland. You can see here our good friends, the cows are coming along. They are entering. And this is semi-automation, but this is full automation. Here we have a situation in which the cow now enters. I don't really want to have a proctological examination like this, but I'm sure that sort of automation could come about, could it not? Because if it's unbound, that will be a good, efficient way of doing things. And here, of course, is the whole process, no human being involved. And at the end, sort of the cow is here released, and away they go. So that was talked about in a British publication. It says cows grazing in the field or housed in large sheds decide for themselves when they want to be milked and form an orderly queue outside. Some dairy parlours are now milking 24/7 without any human presence. Whoa, well, that's not quite mining, is it? Now it's a little bit more to do with life and living organisms. Don't worry about Hector Hugh Munro. This will be familiar to everybody in the room. If it's not, I'm sure we'll have to throw you out. This is the NHTSA 5 levels, actually 6 levels. And what we find is this communicated to me by my good friend Paul Rao. And here we have 6 levels. You can tell it's an engineering approach because it has 6 levels. If it was a psychological, human-centered approach, it would have to have a middle level because human beings have to have a middle level. And of course, it says here L0, there's none down here. Well, most of our vehicles already have some automation. And what we see is a progression up there. And I'm going to talk more about that progression because that's the one that impinges upon us right now. But please understand this, and the other one I shall show you is not merely a description, but it's an evolutionary map. Intrinsically, it's an evolutionary map. It's saying that we are going from left to right, but that need not necessarily be so. But that's what it says. One of the great problems with automation is the following. I refer to my good friend, unfortunately, the late Raja Parasurman and Tom Sheridan. Automation doesn't replace human performance, it changes human performance. And this is one of the big problems with the transition that we will see in the near term. Automation doesn't replace human performance, it changes human performance. And because I'm going to talk a little bit about vigilance, the little take-home thing you might want to put up here is that if you build vehicles where drivers are rarely required to respond, then they will rarely respond when required. That's a great problem. If you have vigilance, human beings are all for vigilance. You're feeling bad already? If I could actually get to you, what I do now as a professor, a full professor, a tenured professor, is I walk amongst you. I look into those dead eyes. They've got shark eyes. I know exactly what's happening there. I spend all my life on human psychology. I spend my life in malls looking at people, staring into their souls. And I know what happens later on. We're about halfway through. Don't worry, that little vehicle will move along. It'll move along. So NHTSA's work is actually a hierarchy. It's founded on Tom Sheridan's 10 levels. These are 0 to 10. Again, you can tell he's a scientist as an engineer because 0 is always an anchor point, 10 is always a maximum one when you create a ratio scale, and that's what engineers like. And I do know Professor Sheridan here, either he and I, actually it's probably the same top, are sitting there driving Google cars, or not driving Google cars as the case may be, but we have to recognize our past in order to know our future. In order to see well into the future, we have to see clearly into the past. And in this case, Sheridan's levels came around about 1974, but Sheridan's own description is based on something called Maba lists. Maba lists are something called machines are better at, men are better at, and I apologize to the ladies, but this was a 1951 publication, and in fact, I think all 11 authors were all male, but we can find here a list of things. But this is our antecedents. This is the basis of what we're talking about when we transition from our current stage to greater levels of automation. And the name to attach to that is, of course, the great Paul Morris Fitz, unfortunately, died at a very young age, a member of the Ohio State University after serving in the United States Air Force. So let's have a look a little bit at the middle here. This is where the action currently is, so let's look at the action.
In 2017, Volvo Cars will put 100 self-driving cars on the streets of Gothenburg in Sweden, with real customers in the driver's seat. The unique Drive Me project is a part of Volvo Cars' journey towards a crash-free future. Volvo has now designed a complete system solution. Multiple radars, cameras, a laser, and ultrasonic sensors monitor the complete 360 view of the surroundings. A network of computers processes the information, high-performance GPS, and a cloud-based 3D digital map, continuously updated with real-time changes in the traffic environment. If anything fails, there is a backup solution, just like in an aeroplane. This includes vital components such as computers, sensors, steering, and brakes. On the road, the car is able to handle even the most complicated scenarios. The technology is so reliable that the driver can focus on something else without having to pay attention to the traffic. Just like good drivers, potentially critical situations are approached with sensible caution. And in an emergency, the car reacts faster than most humans. When autonomous driving is no longer available due to exceptional weather situations, technical malfunction, or reaching the end of the route, the driver is prompted to take over again. If the driver doesn't take over in time, the car will bring itself to a safe stop.
Young gentleman's cutting me off here. One of the reasons I think the Swedes are so interesting is that they managed to build that off-roadway as the vehicle fails. I've always thought that's a tremendous intellectual achievement, knowing where it will fail, and then building the off-ramp. Very, very clever stuff. Okay, so I've got to talk a little bit more. The problem is about, these are the next SAE levels, the ones we tend to be looking at, and we're looking at the region between these two, which is our transport system right now, which is where the transition is. The problem is we've got a little bit of this issue going on, which is, okay, something's going to happen as that goes across there. Not too much. Okay, I've put up the Hancock list for you. Now, you can tell that's more psychologically oriented because we've got 1 to 7 lists. Of course, we end up with transport of the robots by the robots for the robots. That's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you'll see that in a new publication. That is the system, the same system from a human-centered point of view. What is the human actually doing? Well, the human's relegated to a drudge. Let's have a look at drudge regulation. All right, we're getting close to the end. If you can afford me those few minutes. One of the things we have to understand is that there are blips when we introduce new technologies. This is the sequence of introduction of new technologies into aviation, particularly to do with automated, in this case, control of the vehicle. We're talking about things like autopilots. We're talking about things like automatic control, in this case, of the path. And what you see is you see these blips that go up on each occasion. You have to understand that when you transition a new technology, especially into a large-scale system like ground ground transportation. You're going to see those marginal increases. You're going to have to live with those, and then you have to look at the way in which the slope of the function changes after there. I'd like to thank Mike Feary for pointing that out for me, but there we go. So are there things we don't want to automate? Family, I've always been ambiguous about that. Relationships, maybe. Leisure, probably not. Other things. Let's have a look at some other things. You okay? Okay. Cows, either grazing in the fields or housed in large sheds, decide for themselves when they want to be milked and form an orderly queue outside. Some dairy parlours are now milking 24/7 without any human present. Students, either grazing in the fields or housed in large sheds, decide for themselves when they want to be educated and form an orderly queue outside. Some universities are now instructing 24/7 without any teachers present. Be very aware of what you desire. On the way, on the path, on the road to safety, what is it that you will give up? As Christian end towards the celestial city, what did he have to give away in order to achieve what was a very laudatory goal? And here's the modern version, in this case of pilots, and they've gone from heroes to authorities to drudges, and I've got to move along. I'm not going to even do that one. Okay, so let me try and bring this to some closure. One of the great problems is you don't want to leave the last vestigial job of the driver is to just do vigilance. You do not want to do this. This is currently what's going on when we talk about the driver smoothly taking over. Smoothly taking over. That's where Harry Potter comes in a little bit. People doing vigilance, human beings don't do that. Human beings are information foraging animals. The reason you are now beginning to get antsy is because you control the information rate that you usually engage in, and I'm artificially suppressing it, but only for 4 more minutes. But the point is human beings won't sit there and do nothing. They will do other things. And in some ways, that's what's being championed that they have the opportunity to do. Technology's changed. That was the world's busiest telegraph office. It died in there. So in some senses, it's not about how much we automate, but whether we should autonomize, whether we should now take these systems and begin to make them absolutely self-controlling. I'm not even going to talk about that. Please refer to the article if you want to. I'm on the email. Let me just bring this to some closure. There's lots of things we used to do for ourselves. Some of you will remember elevator operators. Don't happen no more. This guy looks pretty happy in his job. Some people are doormen. He looks pretty happy as well. Some of those things are called teletic work, enjoyable, challenging, interesting work. And the fact that 40% of workplace activities resulting in fatality are in the transportation environment is because that's where a lot of people work. And some of those people enjoy doing that. Are you justified in taking all of their enjoyment? There will be persistent problems with something called mixed equipage. That is where multiple vehicles of multiple capacities will be themselves mixing on the roadway. That will not change for a long, long time. My colleague, I believe, will deal a little bit more with that notion of how you mix those together. But having followed the progress in this case of guns, I can guarantee you there are guns out there that are still operating. They're 120 plus years old in this country. That's an old technology. And when you talk about this having to work in a dynamic sense with all the others, you're going to have to cope with that idea that someone's going to bring a Model T out onto the roadway and maybe even onto the freeway. The other great problem I have, of course, is the notion of freedom. 0 minutes. No, freedom has more than 0 minutes. Give me 2 minutes. America. I'm not American. I am American now. I wasn't American when I grew up. But America, in some senses, is synonymous with this sort of thing. There's George Washington and his friend. The keys. The keys used to be the thing that you got as a symbol of freedom. And the keys used to be a symbol of non-freedom when you took them away from somebody. Are we now changing that with technology? Certainly we are. So what I'm going to advocate for you at the end is just one simple thing, that yes, we will see this, but please make it a human-centered technology. Please make it a human-designed technology. And now I'm getting very bad vibes from everybody here. But one last antithesis. Everybody will always tell you how bad accidents are. This is one of the first ever car accidents ever in the world. Happens here in Germany in the 1900s by a guy. The guy involved was George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, and he was told by his doctor, "You've been damaged so bad, you need to go somewhere. You go to somewhere dry, and you need to try and recover, because you're getting really bad," and you can see that's not much crash protection. So he went to Egypt, which was a place that he thought would be a good idea, and he met a man who ran out of research funding. How terrible it is to run out of research funding. He had no money left. His name was Howard Carter. And as a direct result of this road traffic accident, we found that. How strange. So please remember, the world is a wonderful and strange place. It isn't always linear. And if we're going to do something, let us think through the ramifications of what we have to do now while we're in the process of doing it. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions from the audience for Dr. Hancock. So, folks, questions, comments? I see hand movements, but it's mostly fanning.
Remember, I'm a professor. If you don't ask me questions, I'll point at you, okay? Have we got some over there? That can't have left you so stunned that you don't have questions. Okay, glad I explained the world for you. Let's follow that plan and we'll be just fine.
Thank you, Dr. Hancock. Appreciate it. Very informative presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Our next speaker to speak on modifying the curve of future technology development with adoption, product development, and gaps in consumer education is a senior executive engineer, Chuck Goulash, at Toyota Motor North American Research and Development based in Michigan. He is currently director of Toyota's Collaborative Safety Research Center and is also involved in advanced research as part of the Toyota Research Institute of North America. Before assuming this current position in 2011, Goulash served as Vice President of Research and Materials Engineering in 2006, Vice President of Vehicle Evaluation and Engineering in 2002, and Vice President of Vehicle Evaluation in 1999. He joined Toyota in 1996 as General Manager of Vehicle Evaluation at the Arizona Proving Ground and has held a series of leadership roles in vehicle evaluation, performance, development, material development, and advanced research. Prior to joining Toyota, he held various engineering and management positions at General Motors, where he was intricately involved in vehicle safety, design, engineering, and total vehicle development. Please welcome Chuck Goulash. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I learned a lot too. Debbie, we do have our own safety messages when we start our meetings, and my personal safety message is I'll keep the mindset that zero is possible. And so I did not choose the title of this talk, but I will fill in the blanks. So if I can get my slides. I got it over here. So while he's setting it up, I also appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts on the importance of our collective efforts on the road to zero. And I'll do that mainly in three areas. I don't have a car that runs along the bottom, but I'll kind of judge by the number of people leaving the room. But the impact of changing technologies, how we as humans adapt, and how we as society adopt, and what we're doing at the Toyota Collaborative Safety Research Center to contribute to our collective effort. You may have seen this. This is Tom Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late, but there's a short story in there from Astro Teller, who's the head of Google X, and he talks about scientific progress. It moved very slowly at first. About 1,000 years ago, I got to borrow some of your slides, Peter. So technical progress was slow, and it took about 100 years or so for the world to change. In 1900, things started speeding up. Cars came around, airplanes came around, and it only took about 20 years for the world to start to feel uncomfortable with some of these technologies. And now, however, it's only taken about 5 to 7 years for some technologies to become ubiquitous. If you plot on that same chart, by the way, the vertical scale is rate of change and the x scale is time. But when you plot a line of humanity's ability to adapt to technical and societal changes, it's basically flat with a slight upslope. And so 1,000 years ago, it took maybe 2 to 3 generations to adapt. 1900, about 1 generation. And now it's about 10 to 15 years. So the rate of acceleration of technical change is rising above about what most of us humans can absorb. But we don't want to change or want to slow the pace of technology. But as Astro Teller mentioned, we need to learn faster and govern smarter. So shifting more specifically to our topic of the day, auto safety, technologies are really happening fast, and there's a lot of discussion and excitement about automated vehicles. But it takes a long time to replace the 260 million vehicle fleet that we have here in the U.S. And so this chart is from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And it's an example of something that they calculated at the end of last year about one of the newest technologies, automated emergency braking. And today it's on less than 5% of the fleet today. IHS is predicting, based on the industry commitment to make this standard by 2022, that about 2026, maybe as many as half the vehicles on the road will have it. In 2033, about 80%, and then really not until you reach the third decade of the road to zero do you get to like 100% of just AEB. A little bit about Toyota's approach. We think it's necessary to have 2 parallel paths to develop and widely deploy effective safety systems. And our ultimate aim is an accident-free society, and we're developing technologies toward automated driving, but at the same time, we're popularizing features generation by generation of vehicles. So, for example, going back to standardizing AEB by 2022, we will have a version of AEB as standard equipment on almost all of Toyota and Lexus vehicles sold by the end of this year. So we're helping to ramp that technology up. But on that top line of the parallel paths, coming very soon, maybe just weeks away, we'll be adding active steering assist in addition to AEB for pedestrian protection when there's space available to move. So that will be on a production vehicle. But the key message here is, despite the fast pace of auto safety technology, it's going to be many decades for most of our vehicles on the roads to be equipped. And I believe the road to zero will need this systems approach for our collective efforts. So let me just give you a little bit of background of what I've been doing for the last 5 years, the Toyota Collaborative Safety Research Center. And then I'll tell you about what we're doing maybe for the next 5 years. So we started in 2011, and we had a focus on distracted driving, vulnerable road users like children, teens, pedestrians, and older adults, and active safety. And our research style is unique for Toyota, but we also think it's unique for the industry in that our research is open and external. And we don't do grants, we do contracts. And so built into the contracts with our partners is how the data, how the algorithms, how the knowledge is going to be shared. And so CSRC is positioned in the upper right quadrant of that chart on the left. And so during the first 5 years, we've completed, we just finished it early this year, 44 projects with 23 research institutes in North America. We share the data and information globally, though. There's been more than 200 researchers, postdocs, grad students, and collectively have written and published more than 200 papers. And so just last week, we published this online. It's the 5-year chronicle. It's got a really funny URL, so if you're interested, all you have to do is search CSRC 5-year chronicle, and you'll be able to get the electronic version of it. And it gives you a listing of the 44 projects, but also some of the stories that our researchers wanted to share. But turning to the next 5 years, we're using the same approach, open and external, but building a little bit on what Peter was talking about is our main theme is a safe transition to the future of mobility. And it's focused on automated and connected vehicles, and we're aiming for 4 tracks: the integration of active and passive systems, human experience. We started off calling it human factors, but kind of as a play on UX, UI, and the combination of those. And also, just to get a new mindset, is H to the X, human experience. Also, state detection. We're looking at in all of CSRC's research, it's mainly enabling research as opposed to actual product research. And a couple of examples in state detection relate to emergency medical conditions and cardiac issues, and that's with University of Michigan Emergency Medical Department. Actually, they're being interviewed right now by BBC on the project. We're also working with University of Nebraska Medical Center on diabetes and trying to understand better the safe driving opportunities, to help people with diabetes. Our orange arrow is the first 5 years, but I put this up there because the blue arrow is taking us out to 2021. And as we do our research, we're asking our people to try to understand what the gaps in knowledge, what the gaps in data, what are the gaps that are going to exist in the mid-2020s. And so target the research so that it might take 2 to 3 years, but it can have some impact. And it's kind of like the middle decade of the road to zero. So I'm always very interested in your thoughts. This is just another chart on the human experience. It's me and my vehicle, it's me and my surrounding road users, as well as society. Some of the human research categories are mixed automation levels. Peter was talking about that. Education and behavior changes, road user interactions, personalization and experience, and state estimation. Last week, also, one of our partners at MIT, Age Lab, issued a press release about a couple of the projects that we're doing. This is with pedestrians and other road users and surround environment, very heavily into computer vision and machine learning. But here's looking out over the Charles and collecting, a terabyte is so last decade. We're approaching petabytes of data, but through machine learning and computer vision, we're able to study micro gestures, and taking a look at how pedestrians react, vehicles react, other road users react, and maybe we can build some of those things into our automated vehicle technologies so those subtle but important communications can still take place. And I'm coming to the end here, so think about Peter's race car about 3/4 of the way across the bottom edge. But going back to the title, gaps in consumer education. So we've got a category that we're just starting to create for our research, and the overarching title I use is Societal Acceptance of Advanced Technologies. And the societal acceptance in our thinking is very much the intersection of behaviors, mental models, and risk mitigation. So how do we foster behavior change in the 2020s? And what evidence-based factors are possible for long-term changes in road users' behaviors? Just really even identifying what are the new risky behaviors that are may be presented. Mental models. What are our expectations? We are going to be moving back and forth between different types of vehicles over the next few decades, whether we're riding in them, whether we're renting them, whether we're owning them. But understanding how users develop and maintain their mental models, and so that we can explore new methods of introducing and educating people on these new technologies. And then finally, trying to predict or anticipate anyway the future nature of self-regulating behaviors and evaluate methods of enhancing self-regulation. So this is just a little snapshot of the human experience portion of the next 5 years for CSRC research. We do have a website, toyota.com/CSRC. It's got a little bit more of information. So in my wrap up, there's going to be this mix of technology, understanding of road users and traffic environments for decades. And so the research that we're trying to do and share at CSRC is filling these knowledge gaps and helping to support safe system development and road to zero activities. So I encourage your input and discussion on identifying these gaps. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions from the audience, if there are any questions. You have a few.
You can ask Peter too at the same time.
Chuck, thank you. Can you talk about two things? And Peter might have a comment about this as well. The first is kind of the network effect. The implications being that when we have, let's say, 50% of the vehicles that have AEB, they don't get into crashes as easily with the 50% that don't. So we get a multiplier effect from that, and whether you've done some research in that category. And then the other issue is just level 2 and 3. what are your real thoughts? Maybe you want to say this unofficially, but what are your
Yeah,
real...
this is all unofficial.
Yeah. Well, what are your real thoughts about the implications of handing off the driving back and forth between the vehicle in an automated mode and the driver, and the issues that Peter raised regarding awareness?
Yeah, well, thank you for those questions. So I didn't dive into this chart, but relative to the network effect, these darker blue sections of the pie charts are an image of us introducing new technologies and the abilities to reduce crashes, intersection crashes, runoff road, some of the pedestrian and other things. And so there will be a network effect, but thinking about our overarching theme, how do we have this safe transition over time? If we start developing mental models that think that the vehicles are going to do everything for us, and taking the human out of the loop, then there could be a negative network effect, in my opinion, on that. So we have to go about it smartly. We have to communicate. We have to understand. But our plan is to continue to develop the technologies toward automated driving, but then as we move along generation to generation of vehicles, we popularize more of them. But thinking back to Bill Haddon's matrix, I think, I don't know how to redraw that. I think there was just so much intelligence that was put into there. To get to zero, it's going to take this village. You can't do it all with the vehicle. You can't do it all with people. You can't do it all with infrastructure. So it's going to be a combination effort. L2 and L3, my real feeling on that is we really don't know, and that we still need to be thinking an awful lot about that. And so I don't have an on the record or off the record full answer to that.
I'm Stephanie Pratt from CDC NIOSH. Thank you for your presentation. My question relates to your comment about developing driver state detection systems, and you mentioned primarily diseases. Are you doing any work in fatigue detection? And if so, are you thinking more along the lines of a warning system or moving towards having something that actually takes some kind of action by the vehicle?
CSRC, as I mentioned, is looking for these niches and the gaps in knowledge, especially for areas where people aren't studying right now. We've looked into fatigue. We haven't, it's really, really hard issue. We are doing a lot of facial recognition and algorithm development, and so that's supporting, some of the, the eye scattering and the blinking, but CSRC is not focusing a lot of our research solely on fatigue because it is so difficult. There are a lot of people working on it, and we're looking for other niches that maybe aren't being worked on.
Hi, Joe Toole. Thank you both for your presentations. The thing I'm wondering in terms of the advancements in technology, recently we've heard some of the studies that indicate driver acceptance of these technologies. Even when they're in their vehicle, they're switching them off. And the human or the cultural side of it is, are you looking at how to introduce that in a way that the acceptance of the drivers is more so? I think back to the early stories of seatbelts and airbags and the horrendous history of back and forth on that. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, some of the CSRC research is aimed at improving the current active safety features, lane departure warning, those kinds of activities. So we're contributing, with our research partners, Virginia Tech, Indiana University, Purdue University, MIT, Wisconsin, and publishing those kinds of things so that we learn and we can improve our systems. And so part of the reasons that people turn their active safety systems off is that they might be annoyed. Part of the reasons I've read is that they feel that they're more confident and they have more ability to do those things. So we're learning from all of those things and we're improving the systems. Personally, I gamify a lot of those activities. And so when I'm driving on some really windy roads and, and I'm getting some lane departure warnings, this is not something that I would have told my kids not to do, Debbie, but I'm trying to be a better driver using, that feedback. And so from a vehicle side, from a system side, CSRC research is contributing to that. How people learn, how people accept, we're basing, some of our knowledge on my car does what feedback, but that last group of projects that I was mentioning is, some basic research on how people really set their mental models and how we can, help them learn and approach this fast pace of technology change. So we don't have all those answers, but we're looking for ideas.
Time for one last question, if there is any other questions.
Rob Ritter from the Federal Highway Administration. We talked a lot today about automated vehicles and the human behavior, and you mentioned in one of your responses that those two alone won't get us to zero, and infrastructure won't get us to zero. I'm curious as your thoughts as to the infrastructure piece of that triangle. What changes need to be made? What information do you need from infrastructure? Does the infrastructure system work as it is, and we just need to adapt to it? Where are you guys headed with that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work from connected vehicles, and there's a lot of papers out on lane markings, that will assist the cameras and and other sensors on the vehicle to recognize that. So there's got to be a lot. There can be some improvements there, but going back to my safety commitment of having the mindset of zero, part of that was established by my discussions with friends in Sweden and some of the other Vision Zero people, that when the infrastructure side, and I'm thinking Haddon right now, you see Haddon Matrix in front of me? When the vehicle people, or the vehicle designers, the users and the drivers and the people side and the infrastructure, the policies and the environment, all have this mindset that we can get to zero and that we're doing it interdependently. It's just going to be an ongoing kind of activity. Beyond that, I don't have any specific comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Goulash. We appreciate your presentation.
So we're ready to put you to work for a little bit. My name is Jeff Pagnotti, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and I just wanted to give a little bit of introduction to the breakouts and the next part of the agenda. So when this activity was created, the Road to Zero, there were a couple of clear charges for its creation. One is to help administer a grants program that you've heard about. Second was to work on the development of this RAN scenario and a future vision. There's obviously also been a lot of learning that's gone on through the coalition, and thanks to Jeff and Beth and Deb for bringing great speakers like we had this morning. There's been a lot of, I think, relationship building as people have gotten to know each other and folks they didn't necessarily know in the safety community. But one of the things that the steering committee has been talking about is the potential to use the power of the coalition. The 200 and how many members do we have now? 290 members, and that if there could be more collective voice, more good things could happen in getting to zero. So we've had some discussion over time, and we've come to the idea of developing safety priority statements. And you should have gotten a handout when you came in that hopefully we can walk through very quickly. So the first page tries to describe what a safety priority statement is, why we would want one, and what's the process for developing them. And if you look at the first line of the third paragraph, I think that sort of sums it up. Safety priority statements are to demonstrate our collective support for advancements that can save lives and move us toward our vision of zero fatalities. And that's really what these are about, is to capture that. And the intent is to develop statements that most members can support. So the idea is to have a process by which any member of the coalition can put forward a statement to be embraced and adopted by the whole, and supported by strategies, various strategies that could move us toward achieving whatever is described in that statement. And that's really what's laid out in this first page, is kind of a process for doing that, a review process by the steering committee, the idea that they should be reviewed periodically, maybe sunset over time, that we should try to capture how much good are we doing in a particular area, those kinds of things. And that we should not only look for current strategies, but we should look to technology and the potential for technology also, or innovation to move us in the direction of achieving those. So that's the basic goal of the safety priority statement. What we've done is we've done an initial draft of one. So if you turn to the second page, you will see that there's one that's been developed on occupant restraints. One page, pretty simple. Here's the goal. All drivers and passengers in motor vehicles are properly restrained. Here's the potential lives saved from some information that NHTSA has put together. And here's a little bit of background about the situation, the opportunity, that kind of thing. That's what a good, sort of, in our minds, safety priority statement looks like. It would then be supported by various information, which are on the next few sheets. You know, where do you go to get good information on this, some statistics or background, and what are strategies that could move us there. And some members of the steering committee have put together an initial strategy and a couple goals around occupant protection legislation at the state level, and goals focused on primary enforcement as well as on child restraint. So those are, I would say, a work in progress. We're not quite done with those. We had a meeting yesterday. We got a little work to clean those up, but you get the general idea. There's a clear statement of intent that the coalition, hopefully all members of the coalition could support, and then there's some member-driven strategies that various members might work on to move that initiative forward. So what we want to do with the remainder really of this morning is to break you up into some groups to look at some of the different areas that you identified through the survey that was done by National Safety Council a little while back, that through your response you identified a number of areas where there was an interest in working. So we're going to break you up into those 6 areas, and what we're going to ask each group to do is to have a conversation around that area, and is there a safety priority statement, a topic that the group believes would be valuable in that area, and to begin to sketch it out a little bit, right? In the time available, you're not going to have time to go through all of the details. You might not have all the information on hand to get all the numbers. What we're asking you to do is do a little bit of brainstorming and see, are there 1 or 2 safety priority statements in that area that are pretty clear? Do a little brainstorming on them, and is there someone that would be willing to volunteer to take the lead on further developing that? That's what I think we'll be looking for output. So a bit of an outline of one, and someone that would be willing to continue to work it going forward. So we have 6 groups. You're going to be around the room in various places. There's signs on the wall. You see speed and impairment. So I think 3 and 3. And let's see, our leaders on distraction is Allison. Where's Allison? So Allison, she'll lead distraction. Dia is on impairment. Dia is here somewhere, and we'll find her and drag her back. Domingo, speed. Domingo's in the back there. Safety of vulnerable users, Brian Roberts. Infrastructure, Dana. and Safety, Culture, and Systems, Jeff Lindley. So if you would break up, Safety of Vulnerable Users is here. Oh, and you have on your name tag, I'm sorry, on your name tag where you belong. But if you gather Safety of Vulnerable Users, Infrastructure, Safety Culture, Speed, Impairment, and Distraction, you will have until 11:30. And at 11:30, we want each group to come back, have someone do a brief report out on what was the dialogue that you had, and then we'll get to the wrap up and close out of the meeting. So off to your groups. Thank you. If we can get you all to take your seats, we'd like to go ahead and start with the wrap-up session and get you out of here on time. If I can get Deb Hirschman to take her seat, please. Okay, so we'd like to go on and get started with this wrap-up session. What we're going to do is we're going to ask each one of the groups, hopefully you have a spokesperson that will come up, and what we'd like the spokesperson to do is just a quick synopsis. So, did you come to a particular priority statement? What was it? We don't need you to go into a lot of detail. Just give us a little flavor of the conversation, and if there's a particular trajectory that your group was moving toward, I think that would be helpful to share with the group. So we're looking for probably 2 or 3 minutes from each of you, okay? So we'll just go in the order that I have them here. Distraction, who's going to come up and represent our distracted group? Okay, come on up.
Okay, so our statement is eliminate distraction as a factor in vehicle crashes. We came up with about 6,000 fatalities, 25% of crashes, the problem of underreporting, the data on the injuries, fatals, crashes, and associated crashes. The current situation, define the current state of the types of distraction, the layout of the laws, and device use, what types of device usage. Background, we'll look at research, the extent, the use of apps, in-vehicle technologies, and the issue of cognitive distraction. Strategies, we came up with 6 different strategies. The first is regulatory, stronger state laws with the modernization and flexibility in those laws, and then cell phone versus texting laws, that is handheld bans versus the texting. Number 2 strategy, enforcement, like law enforcement training and buy-in. 3, policies for localities, governments, like workplaces. In lack of state laws, we feel the corporate policies and other policies would then step up. 4, education, schools, workplace outreach, driver's ed and testing, community outreach. 5, changing the safety culture, proactive passengers, personal responsibility. And finally, technology, the in-vehicle technologies, driver assistance technologies, device technology and apps that you can use, law enforcement, and things like the textilizer. We also have like a subset in there for like pedestrians, making sure they're aware before they're walking into the street as a part of the distraction issue. and we'll define actions to take out and carry them out.
That was great. Thank you. It's always good when your first spokesperson is a perfect model for what you hope to happen. So that was great. Impairment. Who's our impairment representative? 2? Okay. Come on up.
So we started with kind of an examination over what does impairment mean today, because it did mean the 4Ds, but there's a distraction corner. So we narrowed it down to the position statement. Do you want to read it?
I can't.
All drivers are unimpaired by alcohol or drugs or medication. Dia was in our group as well, so she pointed out over-the-counter and prescription medications as well. So we focused more on the strategies in the current situation and potential lives saved. So I'll go ahead and just talk about potential lives saved. You can talk about strategies. Okay. So we talked about there being the opportunity to save about 10,000 plus lives. That data on alcohol and drugs is underreported, so it's potential to save even more than 10,000. And then we went through a list of strategies. Sorry, we didn't really go into the background.
Okay. Thanks, Brandy. Okay, so if my eyes serve me okay, we discussed a variety of strategies for countermeasures to address substance-impaired driving, alcohol or drug-impaired driving. We talked about alcohol ignition interlocks as a deterrent, all offender interlocks as proven technology, high visibility enforcement, such as random checkpoints. We talked about the need for having assessment and screening for offenders, something that has been very successful in certain states. We heard about Virginia's efforts in that area. Medical review boards was something that we kind of discussed as, I think, certainly with the idea of prescription drugs and some medical conditions, there might be a role for medical review boards, and with addiction. Let's see, my eyesight is failing me a little bit. Yeah, we have DADS. We talked, which for those of you who may not know, is emerging technology that would allow for passive detection of alcohol through either the skin or breath in a vehicle that would prevent a driver from using the vehicle if he or she had levels that exceeded what was needed or what was allowed. We talked about strengthening laws, which could involve, for example, lowering per se blood alcohol concentration levels that are allowed, or having administrative sanctions for low BAC levels, something that's been shown effective in several Canadian provinces. We talked about safe ride programs. We talked about education and outreach. And am I missing anything?
Address repeat offenders, since that's consistently been 1/3 of traffic fatalities over the years, which would include ensuring offender accountability, and then improving detection of impaired drivers, both alcohol and drugs. The other reason why you have 2 representatives up here is even in our small group of 3, we did not reach consensus. So Jana pointed out that with safe rides and public education, there's not that much research, and I pointed out with lower BAC levels that we're certainly not, there's not consensus yet on that issue, although there is research to support it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Speed. Get another twofer maybe? Come on up. Okay, great.
Hi, I've been tracking state laws with regard to speed limits for about 14 years. but I have been doing public speaking for about 14 seconds, so forgive me. We were doing speed. I think the first question that we wanted to answer was whether we agreed with the safety priority statement, and we absolutely do. It sounds great. What do we think about speed being a proposed position? Absolutely, without a doubt, we can do that. I also want to put a plug in for the Institute's research Q&A. We have an awful lot of language that you could steal from that to do a position paper. With regard to speed, why does speed matter? The very first thing that was mentioned was crash severity. At a certain speed, crash severity is a definite fatal. And so with crash severity came later was design of roadway and crashworthiness of the vehicle. So I guess a couple other topics I wanted to mention, some things that were a little bit separated from the speed limits. Road rage was mentioned with regard to high enough speed limits. If you're going too slow, you'll have a problem with that. Maybe we'll flip. I'll just catch the big ones. Let's see. Some technology that we talked about: speed cameras, infrastructure, and then road calming devices like roundabouts and speed bumps. Traffic enforcement. Again, I did mention that since 2013, we've had 21 states increase speed limits, so that goes in with enforcement. And the need to humanize. You know, people justify the aggressive driving culture. Educate, 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 and begin new drivers answering why. Make it part of their driver test. And so, and I'll just put one last one, which was funny. The older drivers do teach young drivers bad habits, so I'll try that. Thank you.
Safety of vulnerable users.
Hello, everyone. So in the safety of vulnerable users group, our safety priority statement that we came up with is collisions between vehicles and vulnerable road users, which, for context, we broadly defined to include bicyclists, pedestrians, older populations, children, so a variety of users. Collisions between vehicles and vulnerable road users can be prevented through technological innovation, context-sensitive infrastructure, and evidence-based traffic safety laws. We started to really pick into what each of these strategies entails and how they can work together to achieve prevention, which is really where we focused. So the technological innovation piece dealt largely with vehicles, things like automatic braking, better capabilities to sense pedestrians and bicyclists on the road in blind spots, those sorts of technologies. And we also briefly delved into how V2V can sort of come to incorporate these vulnerable road users through cell phones, perhaps. The context-sensitive infrastructure piece we talked about quite a bit as well. That could be anything from improved signage and lighting at intersections to increase visibility to something a little bit more widespread, such as a complete street or a road diet, some physical change to the road that allows these other users, that allows other modes to safely share the street with vehicles. That also encompasses speed reduction, curb cutouts, medians, refuge medians, and changing the operationalization of these intersections to allow more time to cross. And then finally, the evidence-based traffic safety laws piece could encompass anything from lowering speed limits to better enforcement or stricter penalties for failing to yield to motorcycle helmet laws. An important thing that came up in our discussion, though, is that many of these strategies, particularly the technological innovation piece and the infrastructure, they're both on pretty long time horizons. Each of these is going to take a long time, a lot of incremental change to be implemented. So we need to be thinking about the kinds of policies and programs that we can put into place to encourage more rapid retrofitting of our vehicular fleet and our roads. So that's something like complete streets policies that change the way the transportation planning process works, or programs that coincide with vehicle inspections to encourage these technologies to be implemented in the vehicles that are already out in the fleet. And that's where we ended. There's a lot of work to be done to protect vulnerable users. The last thing I'll say is the context-sensitive piece is really important. at the later end of our discussion, we did start to pick into some of the nitty-gritty of the needs of these vulnerable road users, and they're a very diverse group. It's multiple modes of transportation, it's multiple kinds of users. We started to talk about work zone safety. That's a very specific piece of vulnerable road users as well. So an important thing moving forward is to think about these high-level, broader prevention techniques, but also think about the specific needs of the vulnerable road users in the community in question.
Thank you. Infrastructure.
Well, good morning. This is easy, all of the above. We had a really very good discussion, and we initially thought about a 3 to 5 year time frame, and then we thought in terms of some of the technology developments, that's really not a practical time frame. On the other hand, there are some things that we need to do today. So we sort of looked at the infrastructure issue as what can you do to improve the infrastructure that we have out there now in a relatively short time frame, and at the same time develop a strategy that will enhance and support technological innovation over the longer term. So I'll give you the statement, and then we'll go into a couple examples of strategies. The statement goes something like this: a national, state, and local strategy to design, fund, and implement transportation infrastructure that will improve highway safety in the short run and support technology that will enhance safety in the future. And that gets at this time issue. It's both a today, short-term issue, and a long-term issue in terms of infrastructure. So what are some examples of strategies? Well, the first is today, move toward a goal of no less than a 3-star rating under the IRAP program. And we had some experts on that talked about this is really a comprehensive way to evaluate the safety of highways, for example. And so a minimum of 3 stars was an example of what we could move to and should move to in a relatively short time frame. In the longer time frame, the kinds of support for technology that we're talking about was to support automated vehicles and the connected car, that kind of thing. So I would invite any other members of the group that I accurately summarize the conversation. You heard the term infrastructure come up repeatedly. Definitions are really hard in this area, but we wanted to capture a holistic approach that also recognized that there are some things that we have to do and need to do right now in the short term, as well as invest in future technology with very long-term significant benefits. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. And last but not least, safety culture and systems.
Hi, Joe Toole. I would say in a light way that in trying to define the scope of our focus, in some ways we're taking off of Deb's lead. I think what we were trying to find was the antidote to cultural Novocaine when you really try to figure it out. That'll be the new phrase that comes out of today's meeting. We had a great group, a very passionate group, a very diverse group. And I think the first thing that we start asking ourselves is when we talk about safety culture, who are we talking about? Are we talking about the culture of the individual driver, of the people, the pedestrians, the manufacturers? And I think all of those started coming up more and more, and particularly users. There was a lot of focus on the culture of users, but also a recognition that everyone in society has some role in affecting the safety culture, whether or not it's employers, manufacturers, everyone who is in the Hayden matrix, focusing on emergency services, law enforcement. So there's two components there. One is an emphasis, I think, on the user. Another one is a recognition of this broader societal impact. The second thing came up was there needs to be a change. And our initial discussion was the change needs to be that the society needs to be outraged by the problems that are being faced on the roadways. And the more we talked about it, the more we started focusing on what is the outcome. That's the immediate reaction, but what is the outcome we're looking for? And the term that seemed to emerge was one of personal responsibility or individual responsibility. So what we want to do is change the culture to the point where we have individual responsibility. And the questions, there was a really good contributions from the aviation sector about what does that really mean? How does that change occur? And a lot of it was focusing on not just changing your individual actions, being responsible for those, but being responsible for the safety on the system. So it was a recognition that individual responsibility just doesn't mean when you get behind the wheel, but it permeates the entire enterprise, if you will, of travel. And that was another point that came up was when we talked about users, we need to be careful not to talk just about drivers, but users include users of other modes. As somebody pointed out, one of the best ways to avoid crashes is not being in a vehicle that you're driving, but using bus or other modes of transportation. So it's thinking in terms of all travelers. Finally, what should be the actions? One thing was a recognition that all of these various elements of society probably have different elements of culture that need to be modified or changed. Obviously, the user, the driver, is going to be very different than the person who is managing the system or the operators of those systems. Which kind of brought us around to the other half of our conversation, which was safe systems, which we never got to. But I think the introduction was really that culture is one element of the solution, but safe systems is looking much broader at the overall. We came up with some phrases. I think that was a big step, but I think the biggest thing is we have a group of volunteers who are willing to keep working on this, and hopefully we'll come up with something that we can bring back to this group in the future. Okay, thank you.
So you all did a great job in a relatively short period of time. I think what we wanted to accomplish today is planting some seeds for potential safety priority statements that could come from the coalition. I think we've planted some of those seeds based on what you've described. I think what we need is some volunteers, as Joe alluded to in his closing remarks, that have some passion about the particular topic and are willing to work it a little bit to get it more in the format that you saw with the restraint one. So if you're one of those people that has a real strong interest and passion in one of those topics, I would encourage you to talk with the NSC staff before you leave, Susan or Jane, and just let them know so that we can work with you from the steering committee to maybe further develop into a priority statement, because it'll take some iteration and some work, I think, to get it in the form similar to the restraint one. But I thought we got a great start today, and thank you. And Deb, I'll turn it back over to you.
I told Jeff earlier that if we were in a war, he would be a general because he always understands some of the things that are going on. The priority statement effort was something that really was a challenge for us as a group to think about how do we bring people together, and Jeff really saw how to help put some of that together. And what we hope is that we're going to have some additional statements that are going to come out from this group. And we have almost 300 members at this point. If we can all speak with one voice on some issues, not on everything, but on some issues, that will be very powerful. I know we're getting close to lunchtime, but I just want to say thank you to all of you who participated in this exercise. Hopefully, as Jeff said, it's going to result in next steps. And I noticed that we started off with Jennifer and we ended with Joe. We had a lot of great presenters in between. And when Jennifer started talking about distraction, that's something that's been very close for some of us for a number of years. And certainly when I was at the NTSB, that was an issue that was really just emerging. We didn't have a standard protocol or practice for preservation orders and making sure that that was data and information that we were grabbing when I came in 2004. By the time I left in 2014, things had really changed. So when we look at the conversations that we had this morning with Chuck and with Peter about how things evolve and how we have to adapt and change, there's a lot that's going on, and we are adapting and changing. But we ended the presentations with Joe talking about cultural norms and safety systems. And one of the things that he said is it's about all of us. And we don't, we all can do better. And I think I hold the mirror up for myself for sure on this. And this morning I got out of a car and they let me off across the street. And, you know, of course the taxi cab drivers are looking for the address on the building. And I realized that I have a responsibility. I have an opportunity to create a safer environment for myself and for other people. And Jennifer started with distraction, and I knew I had to be a self-advocate for distraction many years ago. And so when I get into a car, an Uber, a taxi, somebody else is driving, I say, can you please not use your phone, you know, while you're driving me? And I've realized over a few trials and errors, because when you try to tell them not to use their phone when they're actually using it, it doesn't usually go very well. So it works pretty well if you ask them please and do it right on the front end of the trip. And then you'll often hear the phone ring, and most of the time they'll ignore it if you've kind of created this deal with them. And I realized, why don't I do that on other things? This morning, the cab driver let me out in the middle of the block. And all I have to do is say, would you mind letting me out at the crosswalk? Would you mind letting me out at the intersection? And Joe, thank you for reminding all of us that we have some personal responsibility and we can do things differently. And, you know, that means holding up the mirror and kind of being the change that you want to help other people see. So today we've had a lot of great work. We had great speakers this morning. Chuck, I have a 2005 Toyota Sienna minivan. It is very dirty. No, you don't have to wash it, but it did make me think about when we talked, you showed the chart about penetration of technology and how long it takes for things to turn over. I am that average, you know, the cars today, people have cars for 11 years. I do have one of those cars, and I just saw IHS's release on the adaptive headlights, and I sent a note to my husband and I said, we need a new car. And, you know, and I think that there's so many things that coming to these meetings makes us think about. You made me think about my car and the technology and kind of how that turnover happens. Peter, he just made me think about a lot of things, including where my milk comes from. But, you know, we have these great speakers, and they really help us to think about things. And we don't always want speakers to come, and we don't want their positions to be monolithic. We want them to challenge us. We want them to bring new ideas and thoughts. And we want to create a dialogue that ultimately advances us down that road to zero. We are super excited about all of you all. The people who are sitting here thinking through, working through these things, from government agencies to the private sector, we are going to be kind of the hidden figures. This is what I'm trying to get everybody to think of. When things change, there's a lot of people behind that people don't see and that they don't know. And you all are the people who are going to be the hidden figures behind us getting to zero. And so really excited about what we're doing. Our next meeting is going to be October 12th. It's our 1-year anniversary. We're really excited. We're going to work to get some high-level folks to participate in that meeting with you, and look forward to having a celebration and potentially making some time to hear from our grant recipients and the awesome work that they're doing as well. We know that everyone's really interested in that. So thanks again to Kaiser for allowing us to use this space for free. It's a tremendous gift to us. And thank you all so much for your valuable time and energy. Our team will be up here, Susan and Jane. If you all want to continue some work, as Jeff suggested, on the priority statements, we're happy to help facilitate that if you all can take a leadership role in some of those different spaces. We stand adjourned. Everybody be safe out there. Have a good summer.